this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect. We're going to record the talk, and I'm happy to provide a more detailed outline, so don't feel like you have to write everything down, but I'll have a lot on the slides. So, Romans 12:2. Don't conform yourselves to this age, St. Paul says, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Significant that St. Paul talks about the renewal of our mind. Not being conformed to this age, this not specifically like the period of time that he was writing, but this age is a scriptural expression that's kind of expressive of really the world in which we live. Right? Don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. You know, the word that comes to us in English as conversion, in the Greek is metanoia, which means meta is beyond. Noia comes from the word mind, nous. It's to go beyond the mind that you have. Conversion is to go beyond the mind that you have, to be transformed, to have a new mind. It's really, really important, because I think one of the things that's kind of characteristic of our age is that we have a division, an artificial division between mind and body, mind and spirit, right? So we think about spiritual things sometimes in a way that's divorced from intellectual things. So it might be surprising to us to hear that Christian conversion is very much about, very centrally about the conforming of our mind, the transforming of our mind, conforming our mind to Christ rather than to the spirit of the age. So I'm going to talk about what that means. Okay, so what is a worldview? What is a worldview? A worldview is a way of seeing. It's an overarching vision of the world, a way of looking at the world, or a lens through which we see the world. Right? So our worldview is something that's taken for granted. It's just assumed. It's kind of just, we don't even argue about it. And it's the basis for what we do. So it shapes kind of the personal narrative that we have as we live and move in this world. This is taking a lot of today from this excellent book called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. It's by a priest, Father James Shea, Monsignor James Shea. How many of you were at SEEK this last January? Or was it February? February. So Father Monsignor Shea is the one who gave the talk on Saturday night before Adoration about Jesus as the victor, like doing battle with death. It was so epic. He's the author of this. It's an amazing book. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you today comes from this. So he says that a worldview is evident when things are either affirmed or just like ruled out of court, just without argument. Like we all just agree that this is how things are. We don't argue about it. It's part of kind of just the way we look at the world and the way that we think things are. So, simple example. What's wrong with that map? Why does it say upside down world map? Is it actually upside down? Is there anything inherently like with the solar system that like north should be up? No, it's because we live in the northern hemisphere, right? Did I just blow your mind? like, why is west left? Why is it like? Why do we go down to San Antonio and go up to Dallas? Like, there's nothing inherent about that, right? It's not like the globe like actually goes this way, right? It's like because we live in the northern hemisphere, right? Even the seasons are different down there, right? Like winter here, summer down there, right? It's an upside down world, right? But like this is our worldview as people in the northern hemisphere is just that this is how things are. Like north is up. And in our maps, of course, they're going to be oriented that way, right? An example that he uses in here, something that is just like part of our, just taken for granted in our culture, is slavery. Like, we all agree, as a nation, as a culture, we all agree, like, slavery is bad. There's no argument about it. We're not having, like, we are talking about kind of what are the ramifications and the way that that's continued to wound our society and all of that. But nobody is taken seriously if they stand up and say, like, actually, like, I think we should still have slavery. Or, like, actually, it wasn't that bad. No, it's just like, this is a part of, it's just taken for granted, right? Another example. So, our worldview, how we see the world, what we take for granted, again, what's assumed, what is kind of the basis for the way that we act, right? That it's better to be happy than to be miserable. It's better to be economically comfortable, right, than to be poor. That's kind of just something that we take for granted. The way that we talk about who is marginalized, who is oppressed, really that's measured largely by measures of economic prosperity, right? Which is nothing inherent that should be the case, but we just take that for granted, right? That is actually the way that we measure, like, social flourishing, right? So, a worldview. Okay. I want to share with you guys a little clip from The Matrix. How many of you guys have seen The Matrix? I realized when I was praying this that it came out when I was a sophomore at UT. How many of you have seen, like, one of The Matrix movies? Because they've made more of it recently. Kind of? Okay. So I'll summarize the story for you, and I'll show you the clip first. And then I want to get into the story.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
Okay. So, what happened, what follows from this, the famous scene, is that he offers to Neo a red pill or a blue pill, right? And he says, you take the blue pill, and you can just go back to your world, and you can believe whatever you want, and you just kind of live your happy life, and you just go on. You take the red pill, and you're going to go into the Matrix, and you're going to see the truth. It's going to be revealed to you, actually, how things really are. And this that he tells him, right, is that the truth is that you're a slave. Right? So the story of the Matrix is that really all of kind of what we see around us is ultimately created for us, that we are a slave of this kind of giant evil like cyber intelligence. And everything is just kind of created in this digital matrix. And we think that we're, all of the experiences, everything that we receive through our senses, really actually is just kind of generated by a computer. So it's a pretty good analogy, actually, in a lot of ways, for what we're talking about today. Like taking the red pill is actually coming to see, like, what he says, what's all around us. It's in the air that you breathe. It's when you go to church. It's when you go to work. It's everywhere. The worldview that you and I have adopted, many times we just take for granted. We don't even realize it. And it hides actually from us the truth, which is biblically true, as well as in the Matrix, that we are slaves, that we've been born into slavery, and we need to be free. So we're going to get to that. But I want to present to you first, and I'm actually just going to read for 10 minutes or so from here, because he presents it so well in this book. The Christian worldview. The Christian worldview. So Father Monsignor James Shea says, Christianity is the most shockingly momentous view of what it means to be human that has ever been seriously believed and pursued. In the Christian vision, to be a human is to be involved in an extraordinary adventure. The greatest adventure stories ever written are only echoes of it, pale shadows of what the lowliest human is in truth undergoing. This drama began before we were born and will continue after we die. And each of us has been given a unique role to play in it. An integral aspect of this drama is that we have been born into an invisible world as well as a visible one. And the invisible world is incomparably more real, more lasting, more beautiful, and larger than the visible. Our blindness to that world, the invisible world, represents much of our predicament. We are caught by the illusion of the merely seen and need to have our blindness cured. This drama involves us not only with the awful, marvelous, and incomprehensible being of God, who created us with a decisive purpose in mind, but also with a cosmic struggle among creatures of spirit more powerful than we are, who influence human life for both good and evil. We have been born into a battle, and we are given the fearful and dignifying burden of choice. We need to take a side. Every human has been created for a magnificent destiny that makes the greatest prizes of this world seem like uninteresting nothings. A destiny of such height that the imagination can hardly take it in. Not only are we meant to know good things, happiness, strength, length of existence, but we have been created to experience the unthinkable, to share in the very nature of God, to become, in the language so beloved by Eastern Christians, divinized. Created from the passing stuff of the material world, fused with an invisible and immortal soul, we are each of us meant to be what we would be tempted to call gods. Creatures of dazzling light and strength, beauty and goodness, sharing in and reflecting the power and beauty of the infinite God. Yet our destiny is at great risk. Had it not been for the intervention of God himself in our history, by a shocking act of humility and love, our divine destiny would have been lost to us by our own pride and rebellion. Individually and as a race, we had sustained a mortal wound and forfeited our original purpose, becoming enslaved to evil spiritual creatures who themselves had turned their backs on the goodness and light of God and had become deformed and filled with malice. The true history of the human race has been largely hidden. Events of great significance take place away from the eyes of the world. By many orders of magnitude, the most important event in human history was the coming of God himself among us in human form. He came not only to teach us truth, but also to do battle for us against the powers of darkness, and having conquered them, to revivify us individually and as a race. He gave his life as an offering to bring us back from the dead and to adopt us into his own divine nature. It was an event hardly noticed by the powerful and wealthy of the time. Most knew nothing of it at all, and those who did treated it as of little importance. But that event has since come to echo through every corner of the world. This pattern continually repeats itself. The same hidden momentousness is true in the history of every individual. The real importance of a human life, not only in terms of its ultimate goal, but also as regards its influence on current human affairs, is impossible to gauge by anything we can immediately see. In coming to help and save humanity, God did not just intervene from outside. He conferred on us the high dignity of becoming one of us. He arranged matters such that a human might have the honor of conquering the enemies of humanity. He then established a society in the midst of a darkened world, a kind of colony of heaven that he inhabits and with which he clothes himself. And he gave to all who followed his lead a share in his own life, along with great responsibilities and notable powers to continue the work of saving and healing the human race. The fortunes of that society and the ongoing story of God bringing humans from slavery to divinity is the central drama of humanity, compared with which the rise and fall of whole nations and civilizations is of no lasting importance. The current, visible world will come to an end completely. The invisible world, of which each of us is part, will last forever. We are creatures on trial, given the opportunity by God's mercy to work out our salvation, individually and communally. Our great task, the whole of our existence here, is to find and embrace our true destiny, and to help others do the same by receiving and embracing the offer of mercy made to us. There are two and only two possible destinations for each human: to gain the life intended for us as members of a renewed humanity and offered to us through the God-man, or to turn obstinately from that life and end as immortal failures. For each human, both are real possibilities, and there is no evading the choice. We must seize either the one or the other. Because we're not yet where we belong, not geographically and not in terms of our final creation, it follows that we cannot be fully happy during this life. We are creatures undergoing a testing of heart, awaiting the true home. When this visible world comes to an end and all is recreated, an event that may occur at any time, there will be a final assessment of the whole human race. All stories will be told truly, all secrets brought to light, all lies melted away. Christ will then determine who has responded to the free gift of forgiveness, and so has been found worthy to enter life, to enjoy the kingdom of light and immortality. For those found worthy, all their piercing longings for perfection, for communion, love, for justice, for fulfillment, for beauty and goodness, will be triumphantly satisfied in a dance of joy and communion, and they will experience what they were created for. This very brief time that we are given to live on earth is thus at once both immensely significant and of little importance, unimportant in itself, and significant in what it prepares us for. Christians hold matters of this world lightly, and at the same time take them very seriously. They are not impressed by the scramble for money, fame, power, and pleasure so characteristic of our fallen race, knowing that such things have no ultimate significance. But they realize that in dealing with even the smallest details of life, they are working out an eternal destiny. They fight the darkness within themselves and embrace the life of love laid out for them by Christ, delighting in conforming their wills to His, knowing that obedience to Him does not limit them or impede their self-development, but rather brings them to their true selves, to freedom and fulfillment. They live as exiles in hope and hard fighting, waiting for the final triumph of God, full of gratitude for what they've been given, full of hope for all they've been promised, full of love originating in Christ toward others who need to hear the good news of a merciful and forgiving and gift-giving God. They live in the visible world with the invisible always in view. They inhabit time in the constant recognition that they hover at the edge of eternity. They live in lowly disguise while waiting to be clothed with strength and immortality. They rise by falling and ascend the height of divinity by recognizing and repenting of their sins and willingly taking the lowest place with Christ. They fire their minds with the lives of the saints, those champions of faith in whom Christ and the new life he brings have been most influential. They battle for goodness and truth in order to gain the kingdom. A life like this, characterized by the love of God and of others, lived as a member of the new humanity, no matter how troubled by suffering, no matter how obscure or difficult or filled with seeming failure, is a triumphant success that will end in a crown of blessedness and beauty. A life, on the other hand, of great material success and fame and achievement, but without love, is a dismal failure that will end in darkness and eternal decay. I wish I could write like that. It's pretty amazing, right? What he points out is part of the way that he tells this story. He says there's lots of ways to tell the Christian story, right? But part of the way that he thinks this is important for us to gain it for ourselves and to help our world to understand it is that it's this master narrative, right? And the kind of the mythic character of it, right? The way that we tell the story is really, really important. So just to go through kind of some of the highlights of what we just listened to, what Monsignor Shea brings out. What is the Christian world? We're part of an invisible world as well as a visible one. Tremendously important. What we see around us is not all that there is. We profess it in the creed every Sunday. God is the creator of what is visible as well as the invisible. There are things that are, we used to say in the creed, some of you remember before the translation in 2011 or so, we said what is seen and unseen. Unseen is not significant, is not precise enough, because there are some things we can't see just because we don't have the technology. They used to not be able to see, the parts of the cell, mitochondria and stuff. Now we can. But there are other things that, like, no matter what technology we have, we will not be able to see angels, right? There's a whole world that is invisible, cannot be seen, and yet is real, more real than ours, right? Secondly, we've been born into a battle that started actually with that invisible world. We've been born into a battle and we need to take a side. We were created to be divinized, but we became slaves to those evil spiritual creatures that we call demons, through our pride and rebellion. Part of what I love about the way he tells this is he avoids the kind of churchy language. So instead of angels and demons, it's good spiritual creatures and evil spiritual creatures, right? Because people kind of sometimes tune out the churchy religious language. God intervened to save us by becoming one of us. And he established, love this, a colony of heaven is the church. A kind of colony of heaven here on earth to continue his work of saving the human race. The visible world will come to an end, and the invisible world will last forever. We talked about the second judgment, and all stories will be told truly, all lies exposed. It's the judgment, right? We're in exile, therefore. We can't be fully happy in this life. This is part of the Christian worldview. Notice already the differences, right? Christian starts out by saying we can't actually be fully happy in this life. St. Augustine, you made us for yourselves, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we rest in you. That doesn't just mean till I get to like a really good place of prayer, like resting in the Lord. It means heaven. Like we're always going to be uneasy in this life. We will never be perfectly fulfilled. So our life here on earth is a test. And we're working out our eternal destiny in every decision. What truly matters, finally, he says, what truly matters eternally is often missed by the world. Any Lord of the Rings fans here? Yeah. So Bilbo says about Aragorn, the king, he says, all that is gold does not glitter. It's different than saying all that glitters is not gold. There is some things that are gold that don't glitter at all. Some things that are truly valuable, that are hidden, that are obscure, that are easily missed. It's God coming as a baby who needs his diapers changed. All that is gold is not glitter. The greatest saints in heaven, a lot of us are going to be like, who? Like, of course, Mother Teresa's there, but like, who is that? Like, oh, that's like the homeless lady down on the drag. You know? Or a person that I would just overlook. All this gold doesn't matter. Okay, opposed to this, and again, I think in very many ways, the air that all of us breathe, the matrix that's all around us, what Monsignor Shea calls the modern progressive worldview. Okay, could probably give other labels, but here are some. He pulls out some kind of main points about it. Okay. There are 5 that I'm going to talk about, and then a 6th that's kind of my own addition. First one is faith in progress. Faith in progress. How often do we talk about progress? Like we are marching on, marching on progress. The belief in the modern progressive worldview is that human nature fundamentally is perfectible. That we can get ourselves right if we just organize society right, we just come up with the right programs, like that we can get it right. Human nature is perfect. Here and now, in this space and time. Moral progress is assumed. This is a fascinating thing to think about, right? Why is it necessary that we are more advanced morally, that we're better people than people who lived 1,000 years ago, just because we have iPhones? Like, of course, there's technological progress. That makes sense. But does moral progress, does that actually follow? Like, why should we be better people? And if you know anything about the history of the human race, like the 20th century should make us really question that thesis, right? We managed to kill like staggering numbers of our own race, right? Like, moral progress, really? Does it follow? It doesn't follow. But it's assumed. Here are some ways where it's assumed. Have you ever heard someone say, or you said yourself, well, that's so old-fashioned? So, that's what people, 100 years ago would have thought. Okay. And if we're talking about, like, the solar system and whether the Earth revolves around the sun or vice versa, okay. But if we're talking about, like, whether, for instance, premarital sex is wrong. Okay. I use that example because I thought some of you have taken Dr. Mark Rigger's class. He has a freshman seminar. And before I was here, when I was kind of unknown on campus, I was vocation director, and I would come and do like a Q&A. And they didn't know who was coming in, they just had to have questions prepared in walks the Catholic priest. And so this one girl was wonderful. She was so honest. She raised her hand, she's literally like this. She goes, okay, so, like, it's 2019. So premarital sex. I mean, like, it's 2019. Is the church still? It's like, that's really how the question came out. I was like, has human nature fundamentally changed that I'm not aware of? Like, why does it matter what the date is? Like, which calendar year it is? We're talking about human nature, right? That's the assumption of moral progress, right? Let's be on the right side of history. It's another phrase that we use, and again, objective of what that actually is talking about. But like the fundamental saying there assumes that just because we're later, we're better. It doesn't follow. But we all just drink it in because it's part of the air that we breathe, right? So There's an impatience with imperfection. There's a fascinating thing. I've seen this on my commute. I don't know if some of you guys have seen Project Zero. Have you seen this? It says speeding causes accidents. And so the goal is like no more traffic accidents. If we could just put enough signs on the side of buses to convince people to stop speeding. Now, okay, should we go with the speed limit? Absolutely. Should we drive safely? Absolutely. But do we seriously believe that we're going to get to a point where we have no traffic accidents ever? I don't know, we're dumb. Human beings we're pretty stupid. I've driven around, we all have driven around. There are a lot of dumb drivers out there. Sometimes I'm one of them, right? But not most of them, because I grew up in Houston. It's all other people. No, I'm just kidding. But in patience with imperfection, right, we're going to get it right. He talks about, very fascinatingly, how the hospitals, for instance, caring for the sick, the church Christianity gave that to the world. Because they used to just sort of, not care about them. But he talks about how the modern progressive, we still say, yes, it's important to care for the sick. But instead of a love for the sick person, it's driven by a hatred for disease. Right? Very different. Christianity has always sought to help the poor, with the knowledge that, as Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. The modern progressive view operates out of a hatred for poverty. Hatred for poverty. And it's very, very different what that leads to. Very different. Reverence for the elderly versus a society that rebels against the ravages of age and tries to do everything we can to continue to appear and act young. Impatience with imperfection. Suffering, he says, becomes offensive, embarrassing, and ultimately not to be endured. We get this at the end of life. Why should somebody suffer like that? Obviously, we all agree suffering is bad, and so this person lying in a coma, that just doesn't make sense. Their life obviously has this value. Taken for granted. Denial of the fall. There's really no room in this worldview for personal conversion. Because the evil is always out there. It's in those people. Whatever that group is. Whatever that group is. For the Nazis, it was the Jews. For us, it's racists or homophobes or whatever. But the group changes, but it's always those people. Always those people. Whereas the Christian, this is a wonderful story. The British writer and novelist G.K. Chesterton, they had an essay contest, and the prompt was, "What's wrong with the world?" And Chesterton wrote in, and his answer, his essay was, "Dear Sir, I..." That's what he sent in. That's a Christian worldview. What's wrong with the world? It starts in me. It's not just those bad people or those systems or systemic whatever. It's here. And there are problems in society, but they begin with problems in the human heart. And so it's always a need for personal conversion first. What's the world really about? It's power, oh, it's racism, oh, it's oppression, oh, it's sin. And sin expresses itself in all of those other ways, but the fundamental problem for a Christian is sin. Right? This is what he says: the denial of the fall inevitably brings with it a culture of death. Not because its proponents set out to kill, but because the utopian ideal runs up against a fatally flawed humanity. Lenin said, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. We're creating utopia, but in order to do that, we have to destroy the people who get in the way. Christian writer Flannery O'Connor said, tenderness, that's not moored to objective truth. Tenderness, kindness, niceness, leads to the gas chamber. And again, if we study history closely enough, we see the truth of this. And this is hard, and we should all be challenged around. This is all of us, right? We drink this stuff in, this is the air that we breathe. The marginalization of God. He says that the modern progressive view is practically atheist. It's not even so much that God doesn't exist. They said it really doesn't matter. God doesn't matter. Religion then becomes private. It's not so much an account of reality, but it's a nice enhancement to life. It's a therapeutic for the stresses of life. So, something like this statement, religion is the greatest cause of wars in history. How many of you have heard that in a class of yours? Religion is the greatest cause of wars in history. Again, a cursory knowledge of the 20th century should immediately disprove that thesis. Right? These were atheistic regimes, whether fascist or communist. They were atheistic. Right? Religion is the cause of the greatest wars in history. It reveals this assumption that people, if religion is private, if you dare to claim that your private little belief, it's nice for you to believe that. But you're trying to tell me that it's objectively true and I should believe that too? Now you're encroaching on my space. And inevitably people say, well, that's going to lead to violence. It's the daring to take something that should be private and claim that it's universally true. God is marginalized. For it is an intoxication with the world of space and time. Materialist, that the only things that are real are things that we can see. If I can't prove it in a laboratory, if I can't observe it under a microscope, then it isn't real. Who said? That's not actually how society is operated for most of the human race. But notice how that's anti-sacramental. Because our whole system as Catholics is set up on the belief that visible signs can point to invisible realities, right? Those of you who were here at 10:30 Mass yesterday, I poured a little bit of water over Romero's head. It took about a second, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds. What happened there is he became transferred from the kingdom of darkness, a slave of the devil, to being a member of the kingdom of light, a member of the church, and the Son of God, and heir of the kingdom of heaven. All of that happened through pouring water and me saying, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And our modern world looks at that and says, it's religious monogen. Christian worldview is sacramental. Progressive modern worldview, anti-sacramental, materialist. Everything also becomes political. Because if this world of space and time is all there is, then the ultimate things are how we order this society. And so everything becomes about politics. Oof. Everything is about politics, right? Not that they're not important, but they're not everything. Right? What is ultimate? The supreme values are health, economic prosperity, comfort. Some of you were here 2 years ago, I preached the homily where I heard, it's one thing for a hospital to say it, but sometimes even churches during COVID were saying, your health and safety are our number one priority. I said, your health and safety are not our number one priority. I hate to break it to you. They're really high priorities. But your spiritual health and your soul is our ultimate priority. And your health and safety, they're not always a conflict, thank God. But let's be clear about what our ultimate priority is, right? But if these are the ultimate values, it makes sense if this world is all that there is. That's the modern progressive worldview. And what happens, he says, this is a small vision that leads ultimately to creeping despair and attempts to medicate it. Because this is too small, it starves our spirit. Finally, freedom. Freedom to choose, which is already a particular way of defining freedom. Not the only way. The way that our society defines it. Freedom to choose is the essence of human dignity, and it's the source of human happiness. Look at this quote. Freedom is not a task with a goal. That's the Christian classic view of freedom, even before Christianity from the Greeks. That freedom is a task. It's a goal. It's freedom to be able to play the piano well. Means that I have to sit down and let Ben give me lessons that are hard, that I don't like, and I have to learn how to hold my fingers in. If I just claim, I'm free, I can do whatever I want, and I go just start playing on the piano. But yes, I am free, but that's a kind of like childish way of looking at freedom. I'm actually not free to play a Beethoven sonata, because I haven't actually submitted to the discipline of the piano, right? So freedom becomes just the ability to choose. Look at this quote. I can't think of a better summary of it. This is from Justice Kennedy in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the decision of the Supreme Court was related to Roe. It expanded abortion access. At the heart of liberty, he says, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. What things are is what I say they are. And that's the essence, the heart of liberty. That's a staggering claim. That's a staggering claim. That liberty means I get to decide what everything is about. Do you see how selfish that is? And yet we just take it for granted. Of course. So we all want to be free. We talk about autonomy. There's a lot of talk about bodily autonomy. Autonomy, the Greek word, autonomos, is a law, a self-law. That I am a law unto myself. Bodily autonomy. Sure, that makes a lot of sense that someone else, shouldn't invade and violate my space, my body, all of that, sure. But that I am ultimately and absolutely a law unto myself. Who gave me this law in the Christian world? God. Does his law have something to say about what I do with my body? If I am in fact body and soul, and I don't just have a body, that's also part of Christian worldview, right? But again, we just take this for granted. Telling me, of course, that's a good thing. What happens in this view then is that God becomes the enemy of man, because he imposes a law on us from outside. He's an enemy of my autonomy, and so he has to be eliminated. Right? Nietzsche, God is dead and we've killed him. So then revolution becomes the privileged instrument of freedom, because you have to throw off the shackles of oppression. This is the master narrative for our culture, right? Human history is ultimately about people throwing off the shackles of oppression. Is that the master narrative? Christianity says we do not. Right? We're actually, the real shackles of oppression we're throwing off. We can't throw off ourselves. It's Jesus who frees us from them, because the real shackles are the shackles of sin, right? Okay. I want to add one final one. It's just kind of some of the things that I think go with some of what's already been said, but even further. The individual for us as Americans, the individual is supreme. We also feel democracy is the best form of governance. We just take that for granted. Nobody seriously stands up and proposes a monarchy and gets a hearing. I'm not talking about the merits, but when we come to the church, that's inherently problematic, because the church actually is not a democracy, right? But again, if this is our worldview, it's like the church is possibly old-fashioned. How could you think that? Get with the times, right? That hierarchy is inherently problematic. Where there is hierarchy, that equals oppression. Again, it's just kind of in the air that we breathe with. But Jesus, the Christian worldview, says established a hierarchy. In heaven there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy among the angels. There's a hierarchy in creation. It's built in. Right? Not inherently problematic. Jesus transforms it. It says servant power is about service, not about oppression and lording over others. And everything again is political. Everything is political. And then finally, it's okay to say things over social media that I would never say to somebody in person. And it's okay to be rude and insulting if I'm right and the other person is wrong. I think this is just part of the kind of rules that we all play by. Right? It's somehow social media is a different space. When in reality, it's a way of conversing with human beings, right? So just the real recent example, some of you guys followed, we had an active time on social media after the Dobbs decision. I learned a lot. But one of the things that became clear to me, a lot became clear to me, but one of the things that I learned is that the world, just the spirit of the world, so prevalent. So prevalent. And on different sides, right? So the pro-choice Catholic who just says, I think the church is wrong on abortion, and that's the end of the story. spirit of the world here. We'll talk about that in a second. But also the pro-life Catholic who says, I'm going to scream and shout down and insult anybody who can't see the obvious truth of what the church teaches. Also the spirit of the world. That's how we talk with people. It's not how we talk with people. That's not how we should function in the church. Slander can be a mortal sin, right? The way that we speak to one another. But both, see my point, both kind of drinking of the spirit of the world. All right, we're going to a close here. Worldview, what does all this have to do with evangelization? He says that people have been barraged by a daily onslaught of false gospels. And so we need a renewal of mind. Go back to that verse. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And the church's moral teaching, when we say things like, go back to my former example, premarital sex is wrong, people are just like, what? It's 2022, man. Like, get with the program. It just falls on deaf ears. It's either people are just incredulous or they actually are ignorant. Because, like, how can you not see how oppressive and backwards this is? Because it just makes no sense. It makes no sense to this modern progressive worldview. So what has to happen is that the Christian worldview has to chase out the false myths that have taken over people's minds. We have to go back to the matrix. What we're proposing, what St. Paul is talking about, be transformed by the renewal of your mind, is to be red-pilled. To realize that what we have taken to be true, and the world in which we live and move, especially in an academic setting, proposes to us a whole matrix of beliefs that are false. And that blind us to the truth that we are slaves to sin, we need to be freed, to have a Savior who has freed us and offers us salvation, all of that, the Christian worldview, right? We have to be red-pilled to see reality for what it really is. And yes, just like if you know the movie, to take the red pill means you're going to suffer. And it means actually immediately that you're enlisted in a battle. There's all the other matrices, different iterations, right? You're enlisted in a battle. Because people don't like to have their worldview questioned. None of us do. So I want to leave you with some questions for reflection. The choice before us. What's my worldview? Which aspects of the modern progressive or the American individualist worldviews, all of what I've talked about, where do I recognize, hey, oh, I kind of believe that? Oh, I didn't think that was so weird until I started talking about it. Wow. Okay, what have we all have to some degree. How have I drunk the Kool-Aid? When a church teaching conflicts with my beliefs, what do I do then? Like, in whose favor do I resolve that tension? The conflict. Too often we're ready to say, oh, I just think the church is wrong about that, right? Ultimately, guys, that's something that I have to bring to Jesus. Because the church is the colony of heaven that Jesus has established. It's not just a group of people in Rome making decisions, right? If I struggle, we often talk, I struggle with this. Okay, I want to really challenge us in love. That if we struggle with something, let's actually struggle with it, which means I'm bringing it to Jesus, and I'm actually asking him to convert my mind. Starting from the presupposition that I don't see the full truth, and I don't see things the way they really are. Lord, I need you to renew my mind. And I actually bring those struggles to the Lord. We all have them. We all have them. And I'm bringing them to him. That's what matters. And then, is my faith the lens through which I see everything? Or is it more like a sticker? Like we all like to put stickers on our water bottle. I have Texas Fishers here. Bodie's Buckets hasn't given me a sticker, so that's the only reason they're not on there. Or we put them on our laptop, bumper stickers in the car, right? Like, is my faith like that? Or is it actually the lens through which I see everything? And those will have very different consequences. Very different consequences. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Our minds have to be renewed, guys, so that we can then propose to our culture, to our world, to our campus, a different and better way of seeing the world that is in accord with the truth and ultimately gives us freedom because it's true about who we are. And that's the only way to happiness. Let's ask the Lord to convert our minds. Amen? Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you guys.